I want to thank everybody today for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this after the election webinar. SSDA is one of the first ones to get the information out there. Thank you, Kevin and Barrett with Capital Advisors, for doing this presentation today. Just a quick reminder, SSDA's annual conference the dates changed a little bit and the location changed a little bit. It's now going to be held March 6th through the 8th at the McClellan Conference Center here in Sacramento. So I'd like to go ahead and give Mr. Gordon with Capital Advisors the floor, and thank you again, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you so much. So Barrett and Snyder and I are going to go through a little bit of this. What we saw the other day is definitely drowned out by what happened at the top of the ticket in the presidential race, but what happened in California was probably one of the most consequential elections for education in a long, long time. Really significant victory across the board in a lot of different ways, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts on some of this as we go through what's on the slide. We don't have a whole bunch of different slides on this. We just have sort of an outline because we wanted to talk to you really about what we see as sort of the politics here, and then if you guys have any questions, we can go over that. So we don't plan on spending too much time with you today except to go over really some of the significant implications of what happened in this election. With that, Barrett, do you want to kick it off? I don't know if you want to start. You have a sense of.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start with President Trump and the election, and sort of moving past sort of the punditry you'd find on TV about what happened and the polling and sort of the surprise elements of it all. What are moving into the issues that it presents. Like what does a Trump presidency mean? How does that impact California? How does it impact schools in particular? And probably drawing immediately a contrast between what California did and what the United States did. I'm sure Kevin has thoughts about this too, but I mean, as the nation got red, California got bluer. If you look at what happened here, Hillary Clinton won California by 62%. The number of Democrats in the legislature increased. I mean, voters passed every tax measure on the ballot, including a tax on the rich. They elected the first Indian American woman to the U.S. Senate. And then they did a whole bunch of other fairly liberal things. They said no to requiring condoms in porn. They eliminated English-only instruction. They significantly relaxed sentencing for some crimes. Enacted some pretty significant firearms and ammunition sales laws, banned single-use plastic bags, and legalized recreational use of marijuana. I mean, that is a stark contrast in terms of policies from what it appeared the rest of the nation did. And that contrast, I think, is important because in California, you're hearing, and maybe you guys are, particularly with young people, saying on social media and other sites, sort of an effort by some to do what is politically unachievable, but is highlighting this disconnection many people are feeling from the rest of the country. But it's called Cal Exit. It's this idea that folks want to secede from the United States and take Oregon and Washington and Nevada and they all go off and create a new country, right? Not going to happen, but it's highlighting this feeling that a lot of Californians, particularly younger Californians, are feeling that there's not a lot in common with the rest of the country. And I think that's sort of a lot of knee-jerk initial in the shadows of the election kind of stuff. But that is what a lot of policymakers in California are going to have to wrestle with. Those are their constituents, and engaging the federal government going forward. That's sort of the backdrop that this is all going to play out against. Is California and the federal government are going to be in very different places. And so, I don't know, Kevin, if you have any other initial thoughts on that. But that's kind of
I was going to say that, I mean, one of the things that we know about Donald Trump from this campaign, and we just know from his behavior as we've watched this play out over the last 2 years, is that he can very easily disavow or dismiss something that he says pretty aggressively one month, the very next month. And I would say we need to make sure that we perceive a lot of the rhetoric during the campaign, although I think there are a lot of people who would seriously question sort of the ethics of it. that the hyperbole that we heard during the campaign was more about marketing, branding, and winning than it was about governing. That when he was faced with questions like, for example, on healthcare, about throwing people off of healthcare, and changing the current healthcare system that we have under President Obama in ways that would hurt some people, he said, well, we're going to work through that so that doesn't happen. The same with regard to when he really got needled on immigration policy, you could see him sort of moderate and say, well, we're going to be doing some things so that it'll be, more humane or whatever. But, the key is that what got him over the finish line was a very, very hyper sort of state of rhetoric. And I think in terms of governing, you can expect perhaps the potential of something more moderate. But that said, a lot's going to depend on who he puts in these cabinet positions in his chief of staff, because it really reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had zero experience in governing. And the team that he brought in at the outset of his governorship, when Schwarzenegger came to Sacramento, were a bunch of folks who had previously worked in a Republican administration, and they drove him very significantly to the right, an agenda that ultimately ended up hurting Arnold, and if he had stuck with it, could have jeopardized his reelection. You might remember after he lost several ballot measures that declared war on nurses and teachers and all the different sectors, firefighters, that he lost all of those, and he followed up upon his running for reelection by hiring Gray Davis's old staff director, Susan Kennedy, who then helped him sort of paddle to the left, is that you are impacted big time by the people you surround yourself by. So that's why his appointees will be important. One of the things to note on education is that there's not a whole lot there. He did very little in terms of talking about education policy, except for a couple of things that showed really a lack of understanding. One of them was that he would repeal Common Core as soon as he became president. Well, there is no federal law on Common Core. Common Core is only adopted by states voluntarily, and there isn't there is not a federal statute or a set of federal regulations regarding Common Core. So he has talked about eliminating the U.S. Department of Education, something that Ronald Reagan thought would be a great idea. When Reagan got into office, he appointed Terrell Bell as the Secretary of Education and realized that that was a platform for him to market what good he thought he was doing in education regarding local control and other kinds of things. And I think the notion of eliminating the department might later become something of concern to him. I don't know that he'll go there when he realizes he can actually appoint an education secretary who will go out and spin or whatever, what he's doing for schools and kids, given the fact that education is a high priority for Americans. So I just have a funny feeling we're going to end up with a very similar result. In addition to that, Dr. Ben Carson has already been talked about as a potential appointee as education secretary. It's a post that he personally has indicated publicly he would be interested in, and literally in the last 24 hours there's been much printed about it already, that's a post he could be interested in, which who knows what that means. But the point is that there's going to be a lot of people working on trying to strategize around how do you influence this administration on issues that we care about in management. And the things that we care about in management that are going to be coming up next on the federal level will be IDEA reauthorization, special ed, and that is something that there may be some opportunities in terms of policy making that people that are sort of more right of center have a perspective on this issue that matches a little bit better with management in school districts than it does the opposite. There is the implications of his appointee to the Supreme Court with regard to Friedrichs and the whole case that I know our friends in labor were very concerned about. And there are issues regarding local control that only enhance kind of where they went with ESSA, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that probably fit generally with his outlook on education policy. Less intervention from the federal government, less bureaucracy, not necessarily a bad place from where you start, could be a very bad place to the degree that we are trying to focus nationally on protecting the civil rights of our kids and making sure there's accountability for that, there'll definitely be some concerns in that area because I don't think he's going to be nearly as strong as the current administration. But again, you know, probably a big emphasis on less red tape and bureaucracy on school districts, probably not a bad thing. So that's, I don't know if you had any more to add on in terms of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, just some other probably things to note that if you look at his transition page, you kind of get some hints of where they might go. And Kevin sort of mentioned, I mean, obviously, sort of the more conservative, let the locals do more. So giving more states and local districts more authority, and that can pan out a number of ways. But he mentioned specifically high quality early learning, magnet schools, STEAM, not STEM, but STEAM themed based programs. He wants to expand choice through vouchers, and he mentions charters specifically in that language, and teacher-driven models. And then at the higher education level, post-secondary, he says more affordable options that are, quote, accessible through technology-enriched delivery models, which to me just sounds like online. But it's not what they mean by that. But I think those are I mean, Kevin was right when he said there's not a lot to go on here, particularly in education. It wasn't a major theme of anyone's campaign. But those are the indications. And then, you know, on the for-profit side, if you look at the stock market, the three major for-profit companies out there that do it, DeVry, Career Education Corporation, and Stayer Education, are all up big, like 8% range. So a lot of folks think that the Trump presidency is going to be good for the for-profit education industry. That's remarkable given that I think next week, Trump will be in court defending his Trump University allegations in federal court over his for-profit college. I think it was dealing with real estate. And a lot of folks, you know, if that goes bad for him, he's in federal court, and that could be kind of hairy for an incoming president. So that will be interesting to watch.
Been testify, correct?
Yeah, he's testifying, is my understanding. And then there's just finally probably two things: cyberbullying and childcare. Melania Trump, in the final days of the campaign, gave a pretty noteworthy speech on cyberbullying and her interest in working to protect children and empower them to stand up to cyberbullying. And then Trump's daughter, Ivanka, is well known for pushing her father to do something about the affordability of childcare. And I think that if she gets her way, and she seems fairly influential with her father, that there will be something from the Trump administration on childcare affordability. And we'll have to wait and see what that looks like. But the only other, I think, education-related thing, and we may talk about this about the Supreme Court, but obviously he's going to fill the Supreme Court vacancy for Justice Scalia and potentially others if others leave the court or pass. But the Friedrichs case is going to come back, not that case specifically necessarily, but a case dealing with unions and whether or not we turn the country into a right-to-work state. And so our friends at CTA on election night knew this, and that was for labor, all public sector labor, frankly, not just teachers, but that's the biggest, most apparent, immediate downside to Hillary Clinton not becoming president for them is the Supreme Court and what they may do on union rights. And so that will have a huge, if not the biggest, impact on the operation at the state level of schools. I mean, the influence of the California Teachers Association, the California Federation of Teachers, the California School Employees Association, all of that hinges on their ability to have a strong membership. And so I think that's just going to be, we're going to have to wait and see, but I think almost everyone thinks that's over time not going to go the union's way at this point.
That has a direct bearing on legislation that was attempted this past year by the unions and led in big part by CTA to try to get in place some language that had, as you might all remember, a mandatory orientation time for new employees where the unions would get some private time with each and every new employee, a mandate that had happened within the first 60 days of employment. It was very complicated. It was something that even the governor wasn't thrilled with. And at the end of the day, surprisingly, the unions did not prevail in getting that through. Part of why they didn't get it through was because lawmakers and the governor didn't see any kind of urgency to it, given the fact that I sure believe that Hillary Clinton had a pretty good chance of becoming president, and it simply might not be an issue if the Supreme Court vacancy had been filled by Garland Burrell or whoever Hillary Clinton might want to appoint. Now get ready, because legislatively they'll come back and try to inoculate against the potential that they get a bad court decision on Friedrichs with regard to the notion of union membership. The unions, if in fact this case or a case like it comes back before the court, it's pretty clear that the court will change in a pretty profound way the way the unions have their membership, so they'll be earning every membership that they get, and by virtue of that, they're going to want that exclusive time with employees that are potentially union members. So look for that to happen.
Yep.
Next up.
Yeah, next on the U.S. Senate race, Kamala Harris won in California, but she beat Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez by over 1 million votes. Also, it was interesting that 1 million or more ballots just didn't vote for anybody. This is our first major statewide office in the top 2 primary system where the top 2 vote getters moved forward. In this case, it was 2 Democrats, and so probably a lot of Republicans just didn't fill anything in. And so I think that's interesting, and there's probably more of those dynamics and some of those strategies, frankly, that I think, if you've ever heard Jack O'Connell talk about this stuff, there's all kinds of ways both parties can think about leveraging that top 2 primary system. But Kamala Harris emerged, and I don't know, Kevin and I really haven't touched on it, but I think the biggest winner in California out of this election is probably Kamala Harris. I mean, her stock in California and in the Democratic Party in particular has just skyrocketed. And she's going to be a very visible person, and I think for a lot of folks, thinks she sort of represents a lot of California's future on the Democratic side. And what that means is she's positioning herself to either stay U.S. Senator or do other things. She could become governor, and a lot of people are actually, I saw an article today where she's on a short list of women that could run for president in 4 years, along with Michelle Obama and some others. And that's just, that you've gone from being the DA in San Francisco to being the Attorney General of the state, and now U.S. Senator, and now you're on a list to be a governor or a president, and that's just extraordinary.
Yep. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah. What will be interesting about that now is the governor, Brown, has to fill that seat. He has to appoint someone to take over as Attorney General, because Kamala Harris will be leaving the State Attorney General's office. And a lot of speculation. The most interesting one, I don't think it's going to happen. Kevin, I know you may have thoughts about this, but Jerry Brown's wife, Ann Gus Brown, is an attorney. So her name hasn't been on the list. Nancy McFadden, his chief of staff, who's an attorney, longtime chief executive at PG&E. She's been with Brown the whole time he's been governor. Her name is on a list to potentially take that over, along with any of the deputies that are there already could do it. But that'll be interesting. Are you hearing anybody else, Kevin?
Well, Dave Jones is actually one of the few actually declared Democrats who has a committee up and running for the Attorney General spot. He's got the endorsements of all of organized labor, but interestingly, there's a lot of doubt about whether the governor will appoint Dave. They're not particularly close. The name to really watch is the district attorney in Alameda County, who is somebody the governor is very, very close to, rumored by a lot of people as the odds-on favorite to become the next Attorney General of California, and then obviously positioning that person to run for governor at some point in the future, probably not this next time around, but I can't remember, her name escapes me at the moment. I don't know if you know it, Barrett, but the district attorney in Alameda County. Look for that. A woman, and probably very competitive in a re-election if she gets it.
Yeah.
So, House race.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's also some movement amongst, where some incumbent members of Congress did get balanced. Generally speaking, there's a lot of just interesting political dynamics, but as far as the education agenda goes, it's not anything earth-shaking. Probably the most notable thing that happens now, it's fairly clear that Susan Davis, a Democrat from San Diego, who we are very well acquainted with, will become the ranking member of the House Education Committee. And that's super important for all of us in California to have a voice there. She'll play a big role in education, and it'll be particularly important given the fact that the new administration, the Trump administration, will be, trying to find its way on education policy with a mixture of issues that really straddles any kind of political identification. So she's going to be playing an important role. It's yet to be determined how much deference the Trump administration will give the minority party Democrats and leaders like Susan Davis, an opportunity to really have an impact on policy. With both houses, whether Kamala's there or Susan's in a great place on the committee, the fact is that we have a very unique circumstance with what we call a unified government, meaning one party controls absolutely everything. The courts, both houses of Congress, and the White House. So the truth is, it's a little like California is. In California, it's the reverse. And Republicans are incredibly irrelevant in California political circles on setting policy and fiscal priorities. We're going to see a lot the same on the federal level as well. The most important things that happen in this election, in my view, are the tremendous, successes in both Prop 55 and Prop 51. Prop 51 is something that many of you know I've been saying for the longest time. I believe very confidently that measure would pass. There are some people who have been pretty significant doubters. But I always thought all along, because there was no organized campaign opposed to Prop 51, and the fact that we knew that they had enough resources to go up on television and do pretty respectable media buys in most of the major media markets, which they did do, I never doubted they would have the resources to put together that kind of campaign, that ultimately we'd be successful in the November election. And of course, by about 54%, slightly higher than that, of the vote, it did prevail. We have won every major statewide bond measure except one. And the politics were right given the turnout. And one of the things I kept observing is that as long as the race was really tight for president nationally, it would scare out the voters who tend to match the demographics of pro-education voters that would come to the ballot in big numbers, and that would help boost both 55 and 51, and we really did see that play out. So great to have the first bond measure passed in 10 years. The next big battle is just to make sure that there is respect paid to the fact that it calls for the use of that money to roll out based on the current rules that apply to school facility finance, modernization, and new construction. The second thing is an imperative that the state treasurer and state officials that are in a position to impact this ensure that those bonds actually go to market. There are going to be some games that people can play to gum up the works on this. It's going to be our job in the education community to make sure that the voters' will, which is to get these dollars out so we can actually build and modernize our public schools, actually happens. It's a $9 billion measure. $3 billion of that goes for modernization, $3 billion for new construction. Then there's $3 billion for the community colleges, and then there's, I think it's a little less than $3 billion for community colleges, because then we've got stuff for, is it CTE, Barrett? I think there's a little in for
$500 million
for CTE, and I think there's some in there for charter schools too. So the point is that it's really, really significant that we've got this investment in actually the capital facilities that we operate. Prop 55 is something that at the outset of any contemplation of a campaign to extend Prop 30, there were a lot of doubters, and frankly, I was one of them, because I just thought the conversation started a year after we passed Prop 30. How are we going to mount an effort over time to extend this when it would come up for expiration in 2018? I just thought, I don't know how you tell voters that you want to extend the temporary tax and have any credibility at all. Well, the difference was, and we talked about this very early on, is as long as we were reminding voters of the bad times in education when the state was cutting schools to the bone, they would probably not want to revisit that. And one of the things you guys might remember me saying is that, and sometimes it's not to our favor that voters tend to remember bad things better than they remember good news. And in this case, it worked to our advantage, which is they remember the bad news of those cuts, and they remember it well. So the entire campaign was built around, let's not go back. The TV advertising, everything went in. I kept a bunch of the mailers just as samples of the work that was done. Every mailer that hit a mailbox of a voter in this state, Republican or Democrat, carried only one message regarding actually both of these ballot measures, which was a yes vote. There was virtually no organized campaign against 51 or 55. And man, that really, really helped us in both of these things get it over the finish line. Prop 55, remarkably, by almost a 2-to-1 margin, was victorious, and it made a real statement about what the voters think about cuts to public education. So the important thing is to note what it does do and what it doesn't. We have a lot of folks saying, okay, our friends in labor and others saying we helped pass this, that's our money, we want to see it now. The fact of the matter is it continues a tax that already exists. And it starts not right away, it starts after Prop 30 expires in 2018, after it fully expires. And it does not include the sales tax. So it's actually a little bit less in terms of how ambitious it is as a tax package. And it doesn't start till 2018-19, taking over after the expiration of Prop 30. And it really just backfills money that we're currently getting. And add to that the potential of an economic downturn. Remember that we're hooking our train here to a source of revenue that really will decline, and it'll decline fast if we hit an economic recession. So we have to be careful not to be overly dependent on this being our lifesaver. There is no question with the passage of Prop 55 that it insulates us against deeper cuts. But it is not the end-all and be-all. If we have an economic downturn or anything that's very strong in terms of a downturn, we're going to burn through that quickly because it really is a tax on upper income, which is the stock market. And if the stock market falls considerably, which can happen as we've seen, it'll have impacts on us in school finance. But again, better that it passed than not. It's nice that it's there. I think we hit the legislative races. Anything else we wanted to cover, Barrett, before we sign off?
Just in the state assembly, the Democrats did get, or the big issue on the legislative races was, were the Democrats going to be able to get to 2/3 supermajorities in both houses? And in the Senate, they were not able to do that. It doesn't look like it. The race is still technically on the Secretary of State's website, too close to call. It's the seat that was held by Senator Bob Huff, who was the minority leader and the vice chair of the Education Committee, was in the Assembly for a long time before that. He turned out, and Ling Chang, Assemblywoman that was nested in that district, ran for the seat. A lot of Democrats thought they could pick this up because there were 2 Democrats in the primary that if you added up their votes, they were 55% of the total vote in the district, and she only got 45. And so they thought, wow, maybe we can pick this up. And it looks like they're going to fall just short unless there are a whole bunch of ballots that surge in at the end. I can't remember it's down by a couple hundred or 1,000 votes, a couple thousand votes. So they're still watching it, but it doesn't look like they're going to do it in the Senate. On the Assembly side, they did reach 2/3. They needed to pick up 2 seats, and they picked up 3. And 2 of the seats that they picked up were actually seats that had flipped from being Democrats in the prior election to being Republican seats for the last 2 years. And they flipped back, and they flipped back to the 2 people that held the seats before. So this was Al Muratsuchi defeated David Hadley, and this is in like the Torrance, Beach Cities area of West LA County. And so he won that seat. And then Sharon Quirk Silva, which is just below that district, but in Orange County, she won her seat against Young Kim. Quirk Silva held that seat before, and Young Kim took it away from her, so she won it back. This is actually something that a lot of folks who watch assembly politics think is going to happen maybe every 2 years. When turnout is high, Democrats will win the district because the that population of voters comes out. But it's when it's an off-year election, there's no governor on the ballot, there's no president on the ballot, there's not a lot going on, vote turnout's going to be low, then it probably goes Republican. So they think it could kind of ping pong back and forth between the two parties, and it could mean the difference in supermajority control. So Democrats actually have +1. And then the one that folks didn't expect, but was sort of on the watch list, was Sabrina Cervantes beat sitting Republican Assembly member Eric Linder, and that was the other one. And so Democrats increased their numbers and got to 2/3 in the Assembly, and they're just one shy now in the Senate. So if somebody retires or passes away, or what has happened recently is people frankly have gone to jail, then Democrats could try and pick up a seat somewhere else if something happens, but not there. I think it was fun trivia to watch the 2/3, but they had this for about 10 months. Democrats did a couple of years ago, and they never used it. And I mean, they get to be afraid of their shadow, and because it's when you use it and lose it, because you're gonna lose some races the next time you do something controversial. So didn't happen, but interesting on the legislative side. Also, just unrelated to the races, is on the Senate side for education, we had a mass exodus of legislators, senators that have been in the legislature for a long time that worked on education issues, and now they're gone. So the chair of the Education Committee, Carol Liu, turned out, and Lonnie Hancock turned out. Just a whole bunch of folks are gone, and so who are going to take over these leadership roles? And also, these folks had pet issue areas within education. CTE was one of them. Community schools was a big one for Carol Liu. What are we doing about some of our at-risk kids? So that's all going to get worked out, and who's the new chair of the committee, and who's going to be on these committees, both the budget subcommittee and the policy committee. So the Senate's going to be really interesting as we probably move into December and we start hearing who's appointed to what committees and gets what chairmanships. So watch that. And that's kind of all I had on the legislative races.
With regard to the what's next list, so the accountability system is undergoing, as everybody knows, very significant change. It's a topic that we are going to get into in greater depth in a future webinar. The State Board of Education actually held back on adopting a rubric that was going to give everybody a sense of exactly how we were going to be measured and held accountable as local districts by the state, and actually put it off. They'll revisit it again in January if the staff and West Ed can pull together the criteria and a definition that the State Board is comfortable with. It was thought that they were there. They weren't quite there. They've asked them to come back. As West Ed and the staff come back, if they are not able to find that spot that the State Board feels comfortable with, this whole thing could be put off another year. So I think there's a real effort to try to get this done. We will see what happens, and we will definitely be back before you with a webinar so you know what the implications are for our districts, our small school districts around the state. On the state budget, I will commend to you to look at the legislative analyst's report that will be out in just a couple of weeks with regard to the economy. It's usually a 3 to 5 year look at what is on the horizon from a financial standpoint and their prognosis for what's happening with Prop 98 and predictions on where would be sort of appropriately anticipated funding for education to land in the budget that would be adopted next July 1st, going forward, or I should say implemented next July 1st for the new fiscal year. So that starts the whole budget dance annually. The governor will then come back on January 10th and have his own forecast, his own budget, typically more conservative than the LAL, although that was not the case this last year. We plan on doing something on charter schools. We'll revisit that issue. Public pensions, STIRS and PERS remain big. We're going to be looking at that. And then at some point, we're going to take a look at what's going on with these races shaping up for 2018, particularly the governor's race. A lot of interesting stuff there. Probably the most interesting development there that I'll just share with you now is the declaration of candidacy by Delane Easton, the former state superintendent of public instruction, has announced she will be running for governor. Very definitely a dark horse candidate because of probably not the kind of money that you would need to mount a really serious campaign, but look for her to try to capture that sense that both Bernie Sanders captured a very populist approach to her candidacy, really the underdog, and we'll see what happens with it. She certainly has the speaking ability to mount a pretty passionate argument about why she should be governor. But it'll definitely make this huge field of candidates that are already circling that much more interesting. Anything else on your side, Barrett?
Nope. Just to note on the governor's race that today Antonio Villaraigosa officially announced, it was long rumored he would do this, but he officially announced that he's in the race as well. So the list of Democrats running for governor is going to explode over the next couple of months, I suspect.
Interesting that he would announce today when you basically get buried by all the other news that's happening. So either it's intentional that he didn't want it to be a big deal, or it's incompetence that you would pick today to be the day you announce it, knowing that what just happened in the election, that people are not going to have any interest in that kind of a race for another week, given how huge the news is right now about Trump's visit to the White House and everything. But we shall see. It's going to be a very, very interesting governor's race as well in California.
Yep.
Well, thanks everyone for attending. Shelley, do you want to see if there's any, if people have submitted any particular questions, questions that are out there? If not, you guys are going to be seeing us in the budget workshops that we are going to be doing for SSDA across the state. Obviously, we're going to have our typical sessions we do on politics at the annual conference for SSDA, which we look forward to, and we're always accessible through email. Any questions, Shelley?
No, not at this time, but if anybody does, you can always shoot me an email and I'd forward it on to you guys, okay?
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everybody. We appreciate you being on the call.
Thanks.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.